So, no questions, comments? Okay, then let's get on to Ezekiel. We're going to pick up where we were in Ezekiel chapter 30, starting in verse 26, in a section on judgment on the consummate ruler. And I should go back to, I see in my notes I needed to really go back and cover some material from 13, so that's where I really need to start. We went over this briefly last week, but I'll give it a little bit more in-depth this week. I'll destroy the idols. This is from chapter 30, verse 13. I'll destroy the idols and put to an end the images in Memphis. There shall no longer be a prince from the land of Egypt, so I'll put fear in the land of Egypt. I will make Pathros a desolation, and I will set fire to Zoan, and I'll execute judgment on Thebes, and I'll pour out my wrath on Pelusium, the stronghold of Egypt, and cut off the multitude of Thebes. And I'll set fire to Egypt, till Pelusium shall be in great agony, Thebes shall be breached, and Memphis shall face enemies by day. And the young men of On and Pi Baseth shall fall by the sword, and women shall go into captivity. And Tophanes, the day shall be dark when I break there the yoke bars of Egypt, and her proud might shall come to an end. Her proud might shall come to an end in her. She shall be covered by a cloud, and her daughters shall go into captivity. Then I will execute judgments on Egypt. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Oops, too far. So there's a lot of information in those verses that I just briefly want to touch on again. God says that He's going to put an end to the idols and images in Memphis. Remember, Memphis was the original capital of Egypt. Further south on the, I thought I had a map. There we go. Let me swap that around so it makes bigger sense. How's that? There you go. So, Memphis was the original capital of Egypt, a little further south than where the capital is today. It always, even when it was no longer the capital, it remained the center of religious and civil authority in the government. And lots of temples. Several temples have been uncovered in the ruins, and there was also a rather large Jewish colony. We talked about that last week. Pathros was the city on the Nile River about midway between Cairo and Aswan, where the dam is today. And Pathros also was a synonym for Upper Egypt or Southern Egypt. Remember, it's backwards. We think of being southern being the lower, but in this case, because of the way that the Nile flows, Southern Egypt is Upper Egypt, and Pathros was a city that also gave the name for the region. So when you see Pathros, you can think the area, but also think of a particular city. Jeremiah, let me go back to Jeremiah. Jeremiah 46:25. Well, I missed one, didn't I?
44:1.
There it is, 44:1, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, sorry, I got them out of order. The word came to Jeremiah concerning all the Judeans who lived in the land of Egypt, at Migdol, at Tophanes, at Memphis, and in the land of Pathros. And then Ezekiel 29:14. And I will restore the fortunes of Egypt and bring them back to the land of Pathros, the land of their origin, and they shall be a lowly kingdom. And then 46:25 from Jeremiah. The Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I am bringing punishment upon Ammon of Thebes and Pharaoh and Egypt and her gods and her kings upon Pharaoh and those who trust him. So when you look at the map, you can see that there's a large area that Nebuchadnezzar was going to soon occupy. A large area, so large that they really had very little opposition. They were most powerful for a long time, and they had the ability to control a lot of things because travel up and down from northern Egypt to southern Egypt had to be on the Nile because everything else was not very hospitable for travel. And if you controlled the Nile, you controlled the region. So all of these places that God is talking about here bear some nexus to the Nile. Pelusium, also known as Sin, was the Nile Delta region. That's at the northern part of the Nile, where it goes into the Mediterranean, where today My Pillow guy makes sheets from. Just in case you haven't seen those commercials. The city was one of the major military centers in Egypt, which stands to reason. Think of it from a military standpoint. When you can block anybody coming into your region by how they come off the Mediterranean and start down the Nile, if you can block them from doing that, you've won the battle. And so this became a significant military center. The city stood as guard over the rest of Egypt, close to the entrance of Egypt and the river. Ezekiel calls it the stronghold of Egypt, and of that he's really correct. Heliopolis, also known as On in lower or northern Egypt, just south of the Nile Delta, it was a major religious center in Egypt's history. It had served as a capital of Egypt. Tophanes was located near the modern Suez Canal. Jeremiah talked about it, holding a royal palace. By Ezekiel naming some of the most important centers in Egypt, Ezekiel reflected that Egypt's power was going to an end, and it was going to end, and nobody could do anything to stop it. Egypt had the power, and then somebody with more power was finally going to take it out. And so all of these major cities would be lost, and Egypt would just have no way to defend. Because all of their might had been built on protecting the river and attack from the river. And so all of those strongholds were now going to be removed. So then that takes us to chapter 30, verse 20, where we're going to pick up from last week. In the 11th year, in the first of the month, on the 7th day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, I have broken the arm of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and behold, it has not been bound up, to heal it by binding it with a bandage, so that it may become strong to wield the sword. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and I'll break his arms, both the strong arm and the one that was broken, and I'll make the sword fall from his hand. I will scatter the Egyptians among the nations and disperse them through the countries. And I'll strengthen the arms of the king of Babylon and put my sword in his hand, and I will break the arms of the Pharaoh, and he will groan before him like a man mortally wounded. And I'll strengthen the arms of the king of Babylon, but the arms of the Pharaoh shall fall. Then they shall know that I am the Lord when I put my sword in the hand of the king of Babylon, and he stretches it out against the land of Egypt. And I'll scatter the Egyptians among the nations and disperse them throughout the countries. Then they will know that I am the Lord. I think this is probably the most demonstrative passage of God controlling and empowering Nebuchadnezzar to take out at God's direction. So God said repeatedly in those 7 verses, I'm going to put my sword in his hand. God is going to give Nebuchadnezzar power. Ezekiel brings another prophecy from the word of the Lord. In fact, this is the fourth of 7 against Egypt. The date of the prophecy is April 29th, 587, making almost 4 months after his first prophecy against against Egypt. This prophecy speaks about the time that the forces of Egypt went to rescue Israel from Babylon, as recorded in Jeremiah 37. We've read about that before. Now Jeremiah was still going in and out among the people, for he had not yet been put in prison. The army of Pharaoh had come out of Egypt, and when the Chaldeans were besieging Jerusalem, heard news about them, they withdrew from Jerusalem. So we have a picture here where, remember, there was a treaty with the king of Judah and Egypt for protection. And Pharaoh was supposed to come and help when Nebuchadnezzar got close. And so when he did that, he got up there and all sorts of trouble broke out. We have a number of times where Egypt tried to defend Israel or Judah and was defeated in doing that. Ezekiel states that God's... I'm sorry?
Could you repeat the date?
Yes.
Right there.
Certainly. April 29th, 587.
Thank you.
That's a corrected date, taking the 360-day calendar that they use and all that, and extrapolating from that and putting it together. And no, I didn't do the calculations myself, because we wouldn't have a clue what it would be if I did that.
Neither I.
Ezekiel states that God said he had broken the arms of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. The timing of this prophecy seems to correspond to the time that Nebuchadnezzar was laying siege on Jerusalem, but hadn't yet taken out the city. Remember, there were a number of years from 605 to 586 where siege was going on against Jerusalem, but Jerusalem hadn't fallen yet. And it was during that period of time Ezekiel's writing this, and that Pharaoh is trying to assist. Nebuchadnezzar had to pull his forces from Jerusalem and go down to take care of Pharaoh. Think about how this happened. Nebuchadnezzar begins to lay siege on Jerusalem. They send a teletype to Pharaoh and say, "Hey, we're in trouble." And Pharaoh says, "Okay, I made a deal with you. I'm coming." And when he starts marching his way up that way, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Oh no, you're not." And so he takes some of his troops he already has on station in Jerusalem, or near Jerusalem, and he goes after the Pharaoh and causes some problem for Pharaoh. By attacking Egypt, Egypt no longer could defend Israel. Egypt had disrupted, and God, as a result, broke Egypt's arms. Didn't take them out, just made them so they couldn't do anything anymore. Ultimately, God will destroy Israel, but not yet. No cast or splint would enable Egypt to hold a sword and defend herself. Then later God says, "Well, I broke both arms," which indicates all of Egypt's strength was taken. They couldn't do anything to defend themselves anymore. God will destroy Egypt, and her ability to defend herself and her allies would be lost. And never again was Egypt any kind of a player on a global scale. So you have two times that Israel, or Judah, if you want, caused significant loss of world status to Egypt. When the Hebrews left Egypt in the Exodus, Egypt was the world power. They lost so many soldiers and so much wealth that they weren't a world power again. They were built up again for a while, and they became a pretty solid regional power until they were defeated by Nebuchadnezzar, and they never again were a significant power. So when God says he broke both the arms, that's indicative of God saying you're not going to have the strength and the power that you had before. Even though God would destroy Egypt's power, he would also enhance the power of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, Egypt's chief foe. The greater defeat was coming for Egypt. When Nebuchadnezzar finally defeated Egypt, she would fall and the people of Egypt would be dispersed throughout the lands. Excuse me. We see this as a common tactic, started with the Assyrians and followed by the Babylonians and then followed by the Persians. The Greeks or the Macedonians didn't do it, but what the Assyrians began was, let's limit the people that we conquest, that we overrun. Let's limit their ability to fight back. So let's take their strongest and their smartest. We'll put them in other places, and we'll take other people from other places and put them there. So now you have this mixing originally of tribes, which never works well, never coalesces, and you never have significant power. You want to know why we never have a good government ever in Afghanistan or in Iraq? It's because it's all tribal, and the tribes won't work together. Why we have a strong government in Iran and not in other Muslim areas? Because Iran is not tribal.
It's a nation.
Right. They're Persians by and large, and they have a national identity. Old. I'm sorry, Sybil?
I said they have been a nation of old, a world power, actually.
Correct.
The Medes and the Persians.
Correct. And they don't have the tribal squibbles and problems that these other nations do. We will never have a coalesced government in Afghanistan. We'll never have a coalesced government in Iraq because there are too many tribes at play. And that was the problem. That was how Assyria and then later Medo-Persia, or Babylon and Medo-Persia, how they solved their problems. They put tribes together that didn't belong together so they could never be strong. And so that's what we see God saying would happen here of Egypt. Their people were taken out and moved to other areas, and other people moved in there. Daniel was taken in the first or second wave of the Babylonian captivity for that very reason. The Samaritans were left there. Who was left? Old and infirmed people. And then they brought other people in from other nations. And so you have what the good Jews, I say with air quotes, the good Jews would look at the Samaritans and go, well, you intermarried with these people from all over the place. You can't be real Jews. And so by Jesus' day, the Samaritans were hated. And you see again that tribal boundary situation. It was fantastic strategy by the Assyrians to begin doing that. In fact, the 10 northern tribes, we really don't know what happened to them. Where'd they go? They became Mormons. No, just kidding. Just kidding. They became the American Indians. No, just kidding. Those are the kinds of stupid theories that are out there. But understand, when we talk about the diaspora, that was a common way to make a nation not strong. And it worked. It worked great. And God did the same thing through Nebuchadnezzar of removing Egyptians, and Egypt has never been a power again. Does that make sense to everybody? This is where you all say yes.
I was just thinking, aren't you glad that it wasn't done in more recent wars?
Well, really, 20th century didn't understand this. When the Britons occupied most of that region, and they came around to have the map the way it's drawn out today, they didn't understand that. And they tried to put Afghanistan and they tried to put Iraq together as a nation. Well, here you take this nation. You who? There, there's I think at the time of Saddam Hussein there were 36 major tribes in Iraq. The only reason he won is because he had the guns.
I was specifically thinking of wars like here when Britain and France fought over America, for instance.
Well, but see, we weren't tribal.
I know, but I just think if they had tried to dump in people, how horrible and confusing would have got. Woo!
Well, they did. And as a result, we have New Orleans, 11 feet below sea level on the coast. I mean, who does that? French Canadians, that's who does that. Sorry, I digress. We don't understand that stuff. Linda's shaking her head. Yes, you digress way too much. We don't understand that philosophy and that concept because we're not tribal. We're becoming tribal, and that's a sad state of affairs. But we're not tribal. We don't have a tribal mindset. We don't think collectively. We think individually. That has its own detriment, but the Old Testament makes no sense to most people because you can't think tribally. So it's unfortunate for us, but that's part of our job of teaching is explaining those things. What's the difference between being tribal and not tribal?
And I think Europe and Japan not being a Christian nation, but still not being a us, they were thankful and didn't then see America as the enemy. We will always be the enemy for the Muslims. Always, always,
right.
always, always.
Right.
And we just don't want to understand that how they really are.
That's right. We can't comprehend of it because we don't think of things in the same way that they do. Sybil, I think that's an excellent point you brought up about Japan. We dropped 2 nukes on Japan. We killed hundreds of thousands of people in the push of 2 buttons. And yet, now they're one of our staunchest allies. Why? Because they look at things differently. They understood why that happened. I would say, by and large, the Germans understand what happened and how we solved that. The Muslims and Arabs will never understand it. And those are
and they will never like us.
No, and those are distinct groups. Muslims and Arabs are not the same thing. They're distinct groups. Not all Muslims are Arabs, and not all Arabs are Muslim. There are 2 different groups, but they are both tribal oriented.
Yeah.
With the exception of the Muslims in Iran, which I think is mostly Sunni. I always get those backwards. I can never remember that. But when you think of go ahead.
Yeah, I will never forget in Bloomberg there's Tavis. It's actually an American company. They make car parts. And when Hannes came to know the Lord, he asked his Turkish colleague, what would happen if there would be a jihad? And he said, point blank, then I will have to kill you. With a smiling face. And they were integrated in the city, and we had the chance to minister to Muslim children during vacation Bible school till their parents found out, and then they couldn't come anymore. But maybe for 1, 2, or 3 days they heard the word of God. Says with a smiling face, they work side by side every day. I will have to kill you.
Right, because those are tribal orders, and there's nothing individual done. We can't comprehend of how a mommy could teach a 5-year-old to carry a backpack bomb. It's not about the mommy or the 5-year-old, it's about the tribe. It's weird. Speaking of Turkey, pray for Randy and Dottie. They are in Turkey right now, leading their first tour since COVID. When Randy told us when we saw him at conference, when he was talking to the officials in Turkey about setting up the next tour, they said, "What COVID? What are you talking about?" So just be in prayer for them as I forget which one he's doing. He might be doing the 7 churches of Revelation or something in
Yep.
in
Yep.
Turkey. So things are not the best there, especially since refugees are trying to get to Europe any way they can, and Turkey is the natural way of getting there.
Why in the world did they say the what COVID?
Well, because they didn't care to have they need tourism dollars. Turkey is hurting for money. They need tourism dollars. And I only know a couple of cuckoos that would go to Turkey this time. One's named Randy and one's named Dottie.
I know a few more.
Yeah. I'm not going to Turkey right now.
And if they catch you with a Bible, oh boy.
Yep. So it's interesting. I don't know how Randy does it there, but he's got good contacts and good relationships, so. And were you in Turkey with Randy once?
Yes. Yes, we were on a cruise, so we were, back and forth on the ship. We didn't stay, in any hotels or anything there. So
I would love to go to Istanbul and see what it looks like. It's about the only place
It's
really I
real-
want to go in Turkey. Maybe Western Turkey to see the 7 churches of Revelation. But
Yes.
yeah, Ephesus is pretty cool.
Yeah, but I don't know that I want to go to the rest of
Oh,
Turkey.
must be spectacular, that library.
Yep.
That's whatever is left.
Yeah. Okay.
It's neat.
So Egypt's done for, and let's move on. We get to chapter 31 then. Verse 1, in the 11th year, in the 3rd month, on the 1st day of the month, I'll expect you guys to do the calculations so you know the date. In the 11th year, in the 3rd month, on the 1st day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, say to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his multitude, whom are you like in your greatness? Behold, Assyria was a cedar in Lebanon, with beautiful branches and forest shade, and towering heights, its top among the clouds. The waters nourished it, the deep made it grow tall, making its rivers flow around the place of its planting, sending forth its streams to all the trees of the field. So it towered high above the trees of the field, its boughs grew large and its branches long, from abundant water in its shoots. All the birds of the heavens made their nests in its boughs, under the branches all the beasts of the field gave birth to their young, and under its shadow lived all great nations. It was beautiful in its greatness, in the length of its branches, for its roots went down to abundant waters. The cedars of the garden of God could not rival it, nor the fir trees equal its boughs, neither were the plane trees like its branches, nor trees in the garden of God, which is equal in beauty. I made it beautiful in the mass of its branches, and all the trees of Eden envied it that were in the garden of God. Whew. That's pretty flowery. Notice in your text, verse 1 and part of verse 2 is narrative. All the rest is poetry. Anybody calculate the date yet? No. June 21st, 586. So we're getting close to the final siege on Jerusalem. It's about to fall. Jerusalem's about to collapse. The temple's about to be destroyed. There is some finality coming. Imagine what it was. I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was distracted here. You lost me. Where are we?
Yeah.
We just read
Oh,
read Ezekiel 31.
That is missing in our notes.
Yeah, it's in your
Oh.
Bibles, but it's not in the notes.
it's
really?
in the new email
I
that
sent
Rich
new
sent
notes.
out.
I sent new notes that fix this.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm looking at the old book here.
Okay,
I haven't
sorry.
even had time to look at email with everything
Let me
going
look at
on.
the
Yeah, I
new
sent it a couple of
notes.
weeks ago.
That's all right. I got my Bible
No,
open. It's
Yeah.
the same
This
thing.
week.
I have come to the conclusion that my emails are not worth much because. Oh, that wasn't an email you sent? Oh, okay. And
I
you guys
got
aren't
it.
the only. You guys aren't the only ones that do that.
I got it, but I didn't do anything about it.
Okay.
I didn't print out the new stuff.
Yeah, me
Right.
neither.
Yeah,
I got it downloaded, but I didn't print it.
Yeah, you can use it on your tablet or whatever, but most of you are using your tablet, so whatever. Yeah, if it's not in it's not in the old notes, it's in new stuff. I had somehow missed the entire chapter in the notes, and I had to go back and redo them and stuff. Okay, where was I? It's June
Chapter
20,
30.
chapter 31, verses 1 through 9 is what I
Right.
just read.
Right.
And it's dated June 21st, 586. It's the beginning of the final siege on Jerusalem. Think about where Jerusalem has been. In 605, the first year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, he starts laying siege on Jerusalem. And he deports a bunch of people. And he cuts off all the fields around Jerusalem. All they got to eat is what's inside. Fortunately, Hezekiah had built a tunnel and built a water source, so they had water. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why Nebuchadnezzar didn't know that and didn't shut it off. The siege would have been much shorter. But they had nothing to eat except what was in town. And so by the end of it, they were eating their kids. Probably each other, too. And, we have that in our history, too. That's not just something that tribal people do. Go across the Donner Pass north of Lake Tahoe and find out what happened there.
Don't want to, thank you.
Linda and I, a couple years ago, traveled
that
through the
was a
Donner
different
Pass.
scenario.
What? How's it
No, it
different?
wasn't.
Donner Pass.
How is it different?
Because I think it was acceptable back then. It wasn't acceptable to eat people, but they had no choice.
Well, that's
How do
exactly
you
what
eat your own child? But these people were dead already. They weren't alive, and then they killed them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the difference.
There's a
That's
minor
a big difference.
there's a minor difference to that.
No. Nope.
I just know you guys would kill me first because you could feast for a long time.
Jeez.
Yuck!
Ann would be a snack, okay?
Yeah.
For me, you're feasting from now through Thanksgiving.
Oh.
And I don't like turkey either. So just think of what their life was like. It's now nearing the end, and they've had to go through these years.
Why didn't they surrender?
Because God hadn't planned it that way.
Well, that's an answer, but that's not what they were thinking.
Good answer, Sandy. Good answer.
Yeah, you've been hanging out
get
with Chuck
that.
too much. That's an unacceptable answer, Sandy. It is true, but unacceptable.
Yeah.
Why? Somebody answer the question. Why didn't they surrender?
Because they didn't have the Lord in their heart.
Because everything about them was tied to the land, and if they surrendered, they would
Yeah.
lose their land.
Yeah,
They'd
certainly
lose their
that's true.
heritage.
The land was a big deal of it. But what did these people, the last final group in Jerusalem, believe? Remember what happened? Go ahead, Ann.
They thought that God was going to rescue them anyway.
Right.
But when
Oh,
they
yeah.
got to the point that they were eating their children, didn't they get a sense that no, God's not rescuing them?
No.
Mm-mm.
Some
blows my
never got that.
Yeah, it
They
blows my mind.
always understood God's promise as kind of conditional. He didn't take care of Israel, and Assyria took them out. Well, they weren't really good Jews. And then most of Judah's gone. Well, they weren't really the good Jews. And so the people that are left in Jerusalem, well, we're the priests and we're the best, and God absolutely will have to take care of us because we're the remnant and we're the good Jews. As somebody was munching on their arm. They just never got it.
They must have had a strong delusion.
They did. Why?
They were God's chosen people.
They were
Yeah,
God's chosen
like I
people,
said.
but he did what to them?
hardened their hearts.
Right.
Mhm.
And your salvation depended on it.
I'm sorry for the people that ate other people so that I could be saved. That's just plain gross.
But Scripture is full of examples of people that were there for a specific purpose that ultimately we benefit from.
Yeah.
How many people were born lame so Jesus or Paul or Peter could heal them? You know, that just seems to be patently unfair. I'm just glad I'm not the judge of that. But Israel had to go through this so that we understood who God was. And he's the potter. He can make the vessel for honor or dishonor. And you know the vessel he makes for dishonor is a bedpan. Okay. So Jerusalem was at its last holdout, and it was holding out hope that rescue would come. Egypt failed; they're not going to get there. So somehow God was going to deliver them. I wouldn't doubt that there were Jews in Jerusalem that was thinking that the God of angel armies is going to ride on down and take care of Nebuchadnezzar. They had no thought that Nebuchadnezzar was doing what God wanted. They had no thought that this was coming from God. Of course, we see the text where Ezekiel's telling them, look, I put my sword in Nebuchadnezzar's hand. He's doing this for me. You guys need to get with the program. They didn't think that. Ezekiel records the proclamation against the Pharaoh, king of Egypt. In the biblical text, you notice that the arrangement of the text includes a different genre setting for that text. This section is presented as poetry. So Ezekiel is reciting a poem to them, and in our modern world, Ezekiel would have been rapping that to them and done it with a beat, and they would have heard the poem and comprehended some of what was happening. The poem begins with a recounting of the fall of the king of Assyria. You know, if you're looking at Assyria from a purely military standpoint, up until the moment that they fell, they were the greatest in the world. They were the greatest that had ever been. They were the fiercest. They were the ugliest. They were the most diabolical. They didn't play fair at all, and they just soon kill you, look at you. But everybody was afraid of them. That's what they intended. And if we think that the Arab and Muslim cutthroats of the Taliban and so forth are new, they are just recycling the things that Assyria did. But here God's recounting, hey, they fell. They fell hard. They were really tough, but they fell, and they fell hard. In verse 9, the reference to the Garden of Eden is generally understood to be a reference to the entire world. When I wrote this, I kind of agreed with it, but I've read it enough times now. I don't know that that's necessarily the way you want to completely understand this. I would have... Who'd we lose? We lost the merge.
Brian.
Yep. Bye, guys. I don't want to read into the text something that I can't substantiate, and I can't validate a reason to say Garden of Eden would be used as a synonym for the entire world. There's just nothing in the text that would lead you to say that that's an expression of so much that Garden of Eden would be the world. There's just nothing there that tells me that.
I think I'm dense tonight. In this poem, is this poem about Egypt?
No, it's about Assyria. Well, ultimately it'll be about Egypt, but he's talking about first how Assyria fell. They were the biggest and the best, and who took them out? But Babylon. Who took out Egypt? Babylon.
So this poem is about Assyria.
Yes.
Okay. I think I'm dense tonight.
That's okay. It's dense out. I believe that if we view this statement for what it says, the Garden of Eden, we get the understanding that the cedars of Lebanon represent something greater than the greatest trees in the actual garden. Historically speaking, Assyria was the greatest power in world history until that point. So the reference to Eden should be taken, I think, literally, as a reference to Eden. What is Eden? How do we view Eden in our mindset?
As perfection.
Exactly. And so here this poem is saying this even appears to be bigger than God's perfection of the garden. In other words, this is hyperbolic language talking up how great Assyria was. I don't think it means the entire world. I just don't understand how scholars can get there. Sometimes you can see that it is a reference, but other times I think hyperbolic language just needs to be understood for what it is. The question is, and this is the question that Mary was asking really without knowing it, why does God spend so much time talking about Assyria in a prophecy against Egypt?
Because Assyria's going to take Egypt out.
No, Assyria's long gone.
Oh, that's right.
Assyria fell, they took out Israel in 722, but
right.
they began to decline not too long after that. And of course that God declining them because they took out, at his direction, they took out Israel.
Well, didn't Judah try to make a deal with a treaty with Assyria, and Assyria got taken out, and then they made one with Egypt, and Egypt is about to get taken out?
Right. The Assyria had been declining in power, and Babylon was growing in power, and so it's a logical next step for Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar's dad takes out Assyria, and Assyria is amalgamated into the rest of Babylon, and all of the property that Assyria owns now is Babylon's. And eventually Babylon will fall, and Medo-Persia will take all of what, Babylon begins to decline, Medo-Persia inclines, take all over everything that Babylon had. And then, of course, we know the Macedonians, or the Greeks, Alexander the Great, comes and takes everything that the Medo-Persians had. God was equating the former power of Assyria, to the now waning power of Egypt. Let's see, it's 8:59. Okay. I'm not going to go into this section. We'll come back to this starting next week, Lord willing. There's just too much to talk about here.
But in that sense, the Bible is a pretty accurate history book.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Daniel, before Alexander the Great, Daniel predicts who will be the powers and even names them before Greece was a name. Pretty impressive. Of course, the guy that wrote it is outside of time. So everything is present to him. Everything is past, everything's future. So it's not difficult for him to see the future because it's present.
That's a canoodle.
Oh yeah. But my goal is to make you ask questions. So we'll start in chapter 31, verse 10 next week, Lord willing.